This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world.
I wish you bluebirds in the spring to give your heart a song to sing, and then a kiss, but more than this, I wish you love.
You just heard Bette Davis sing I Wish You Love. I'm Anna Tyler, and this is a special episode of Thank You Mama. Today, we will celebrate Miss D's birthday and learn her lessons from her longtime assistant and friend, Kathryn Sermak. Welcome, Kathryn.
Hello, Anna. Thank you for having me on your wonderful podcast.
Thank you for being my guest. I'm so excited about our conversation. So Kathryn is the author of a book called Miss D and Me, Life with the Invincible Bette Davis, in which Kathryn writes about the 10 years she spent on the side of the legendary Bette Davis. Kathryn, tell us more about the book.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a book that I promised Misty. She always told me one day you must tell our story. And it's a story about two women, 50 years different. One, the later part of her life, and one just beginning. In other words, Misty was 71 when I met her, and I was 21, 22. And although I didn't know anything about her, she taught me everything. She taught me everything, not only in the way of professionalism and about whether it's working in the film business. Some of her life lessons I have used just along my road and journey to life. And it's about how these two women, two opposite sides of the track, eventually they become best friends. You know, she was my mentor, the greatest mentor one could ever have. And so it's a story about our journey together and how she was way above her time and she supported women. And now we look at what's going on today, and Miss D was doing that over 80 years ago.
This is why we're making this exception, Kathryn, because normally this podcast is about mamas and what you've learned from mamas. Bette is not your mama. And let me say sorry to Kathryn's mama here that we are talking about Miss D instead. But oh, what a life and how many lessons. I learned so much reading your book. And then after your book, I read her memoir, The Lonely Life, and that was packed with lessons. So I'm very, very excited about our conversation today.
Misty was incredibly bright and so brutally honest. I remember the very first time before our interview, I read her biography, The Lonely Life, and it was just like the person was right in front of you. And I was stunned at how open and honest she was about everything. And then after working with her, well, it's history, because that is who she is. Not always easy, because a lot of times people like to sugarcoat, but Missy always said she didn't have time for that. And it's much easier, truthfully, if one is honest, because you can never go back. She used to say, if they're not telling the truth, they're not going to remember who they said what to. And then it takes up too much space in your brain. So it's just much easier. Just be honest and move along.
Kathryn, we are talking about the first lesson actually here now.
Okay.
But before we do that, I wanted to talk about her a little bit and talk about what a pioneer she was, because I've always been a big fan of hers. I told you how my mom, who was also a movie star, albeit in Yugoslavia back then, she was in love with Bette Davis, and she would never get starstruck. But I grew up hearing the story about how she met Bette at a film festival somewhere and how she had a chat with her. And this was just such a special experience for her. And then when I was a teenager, I discovered all about Eve, and that became my favorite movie of all times. I think if there was only one movie I could watch for the rest of my life, this would be it.
Oh, that's nice. It's one of my favorites too.
Oh, it's incredible. Well, it's a whole world in a movie. But so I knew her as a movie star, and then reading your book and reading her memoir, I learned that she was a pioneer, that she was the first woman as a head of the Academy of Motion Pictures.
Right.
That she was the first actor to get 10 Oscar nominations.
Right.
That she was the first actor who rebelled against the 7-year contract that the studios used to give their actors. So she sued Warner Brothers and tried to get out of this contract, which basically enslaved actors. She was fighting for a better salary, a right to refuse a role. It's amazing they didn't have rights to refuse a role, and for better scripts.
Oh, yes, it was like slavery. She had to leave the country, and she went to England, and Warner Brothers brought the lawsuit over in England. And the reason, she used to always say George Arliss was there, and he gave her the best advice. Keep your head up high, go back, because she actually lost. And at that time, had she won, it would have set the precedent not only in America, but for the film and the studio system all over the world. So she was one up against all the studios, but in the end it was Olivia years later, but who finally won the battle of it. But as she always said, she lost the battle, but she won the war. And when she came back to the U.S., she had her head high. And from then on, she got great parts, Jezebel being one of them, the first one when she came back. And I think that's when Warner Brothers really gave her great respect, and everything changed from then on. And it was self-preservation. For Misty, it was really, she always said, once you make whoever, the company money, that's when you can start asking for a raise. You've proved yourself. But Miss Davis was always all about the quality and the work.
What I want to mention is that she spent 60 years on the screen, which is incredible. And she was in over 100 roles. She had 4 marriages and 3 children. Mm-hmm. And at 75, she beat breast cancer and had a stroke. And with your support, came back and went back to work and worked until her death when she was 81.
Yes.
Amazing.
Oh, she loved her work. She loved her work. And Miss D, she had so much energy. One thing I remember, as you know, in the book, one of her first questions to me is, what sign are you? And I laughed. It's like, what sign? And it's like, your birth sign. And I'm a Libra. And she said, well, I'm an Aries. That's good. Because it's the balance. But Aries have to be first at everything. And that, I will say, Miss Davis was the first at whatever she did. She's the first woman to get the AFI, along with all those other attributes you said. She always needed to be the first. Even when she passed, we did her memorial over on the Warner Brothers soundstage. Nobody had ever done it.
Okay, and now I want to mention a cute thing. So I can hear in my headphones some jingling. And I remember from our first interview when we met that you're wearing bracelets, and those are her bracelets.
Oh, so, yes, I have them on. You're right.
It's very cute that
I'm
we
sorry
have
about the jingling, but you are right. They are Miss Davis's bracelets. I always wear them. She always wore them. And the last day when we were in Paris in the hospital, she had me put them on and put her necklace on, and I always wear it for good luck. It's always like she's all around me. She's all around us. I'm in my office, and as you've seen my office before.
Yeah. And she jingles all around you and now around us. And we have to mention why we are doing this episode. We are doing this special episode to celebrate Miss Davis's birthday. She is going to turn 112 on April 5th.
Well, Miss Davis would then say you add the numbers together. So 112, that'd be 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4. So she will be 4 years old and staying forever young.
I love it.
Yeah, she said after 50, you add the numbers together.
I love that. Okay, let's go back to what you've learned from her. Let's Please share.
Okay.
We heard about honesty.
Right. I'm trying to think. One of the most important is to thy own self be true. The two that ring out, meaning she always believed in instincts, and nobody knows anything better than you yourself if one listens to their inner self. And she always did. She always went with her gut instinct. It took me forever, years upon years to learn this. But I think it's also the way I was raised. Her mother always was great support. And I think also Missy was just born with a force of nature in her. As she said, at age 3, her bow was, her mother didn't have, there was a crease in it. And Misty she was a perfectionist, an absolute perfectionist. I finally learned that lesson. It's only taken me like 20, 30 years. I didn't understand it, but there are habits. And if I was brought up going through Catholic school, I mean, you couldn't ask questions. Miss Davis always welcomes questions. Make your mistakes. Make many mistakes. Just don't make the same one twice. Well, that's fair. She was very, very practical and very wise. And so I know your blog, Cass, it's a tribute to mamas, but I always say there were times Misty would joke and it's like, you're my adopted stepdaughter. But I say to anybody, whether, of course, I have my own mother who I adore dearly and love, but people come into your life, and sometimes mentors they can be like a mother figure, a father figure, a there were times Miss Davis was my grandmother, my mother, my best friend, a lot of people all in one, because basically you're around the person 24/7. And during that time, I wasn't aware of what I was learning. I think I learned more after her passing, but it's no different with two people. Their energies come together. And she learned things from me, and she changed, and vice versa.
What did you teach her?
What does the youth bring the elderly? The craziness, the fun. I was brought up in sports and could always go out, and I was adventurous. And as I mentioned in the book, Misty didn't have that until the last part of the book, the road trip. Because being so worldly famous, she didn't have that type of freedom. And let alone when they were working you 6 days a week, you're working morning and night, sometimes on 2 different films. You only have Sunday off. And you better believe those studio systems, they don't want anything happening to their, what I call cash cow, or the goose that laid the golden egg. That's why they would send a driver to you, to pick her up, to make sure you won't get in an accident. And, it would hold shooting up, let alone what if something happens to her. So all of that, she never had that kind of freedom.
How old was she when you went on that trip?
So I would say she was 76 years old, 76 trombones. That's what she wanted for her birthday, and that's what she got.
I love the story about the road trip. I love the whole book.
We had so much fun on that road trip. I have a map, of course, in my house. We both had one. And it was so much fun. And of course, we had the rules. She made up the rules. So you couldn't plan ahead wherever we were. Every morning we have to be on the road by 10. And we didn't know where we're going. And you couldn't take the peripheric, or you couldn't take freeways. It had to always be along the side of the ocean. She loved the ocean.
So, Kathryn, we've learned by now the importance of honesty, to yourself be true, to just take to yourself, to trust your instincts.
March to the beat of your own drum. That's very important.
To make mistakes, but then own them.
To make mistakes, but also, if you know yourself, one of the things she always said, people will try to influence you. And if you know yourself, she would always say, march to the beat of your own drum and dare to do the unthinkable. That's how she grew in films. Instead of where people would try to pigeonhole you, you have to have the courage, like she did at a very young age, to play Queen Elizabeth. And she had the courage to where everybody else, they were always portraying being glamorous. And she went deeper into the character, and she allowed herself to look whatever way she felt that character would look, whether you're beaten up. Basically, you weren't looking glamorous.
That was my favorite part in the feud, which, yeah, I like that part when she comes out of her dressing room after she put on her makeup for baby Jane, and everybody's utterly shocked. And I can absolutely imagine this to be true, for her to be like, no, I am going to look like this freak because this is what my character is asking for.
Yes, Mr. Aldrich couldn't win. He saw her. Oh, everybody was horrified on the set. And all Miss Davis asked is look at the rushes. Look at the rushes before, how she looked, and one, when she's all painted in the white. And he absolutely agreed with her.
What a movie. What an incredible movie. So powerful.
Not one of my favorites, I have to
admit. It's hard to digest.
Loves it. She's got a cult following on that movie, but I have to say it's not.
What is your favorite?
I think it's All About Eve. I mean, there's so many, but that I haven't seen all her movies because in ways, every time we would go to all these award shows, they keep showing the same clips. And so it's ironic. At times you think you've seen them all. And then we were working on a documentary, which I had to start watching her film if I was going to be the one to interview her. And after seeing a few, I started to see her not the way I know her, but basically how the public started seeing her. And at that, she said, then stop. Because you know what? Then the relationship changes. And what we had was, that relationship, how I knew her, and probably like how her son knows her. And it's interesting because even when writing this book, I thought, you know what, let me go back, because they always do these Bette Davis festivals, thanks to Turner Classic Movie. And if you watch, I started to watch because they had like for a few days or a week straight. And after seeing 2 or 3, it's a very interesting experience, because then I thought, nope, I don't want to watch anymore, because that's not the woman I know. The woman I know, those are characters that she plays.
I feel very similar with my mom. I had to grow up a lot to be able to watch my mom's movies, because I remember when I was a kid and she would take me to the screenings and I would see her on the screen. Even the movies where I was acting with her, when I would see it on the screen, there was such a clash between my mom and this person on the screen. It just did not feel right. I just didn't know how to how do you say it in English?
Compartmentalize.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You told me another thing that I want to remember. You said she taught you to live life to the fullest.
Absolutely. And she always did. Her biography is called The Lonely Life. And she told me a lot of people misunderstood that, because the title, what she was referring to, is an artist lives a lonely life, in that they create, and only they can create, their character, because it comes from within. Her generation always believed acting needed to be bigger than life. She was not somebody from the school of actors studio. That was not her generation, and she did not believe in it. She couldn't. When we were on one film, and the actor, he was outside running around, and then he finally comes in huffing and puffing, and Miss Davis said, "What in the world are you doing?" And he was like, "Well, I'm getting ready for the part." And it's for her, all you have to do is go in. Like one director said, well, just think of your dog passing. He was trying in order to raise emotions and cry. And Miss Davis said, just tell me you want me to cry. I don't need to use any of those techniques.
It's fascinating.
It was just different schools of acting. But it is interesting because a lot of those films they uphold today, which is why you have Turner Classic Movies.
Which we love. But I want to go back to living life to the fullest.
Yes.
Because you told me that she made work fun. and that she celebrated life, which I want to learn.
Oh, she always did. Every occasion, no matter wherever we were. If it's Valentine's Day, she would dress up. If it's St. Patrick's Day, whether we're in New York, you just get all, we would have people over and you get the hats and everything needs to be green. Or the one time a lot of times we weren't here in California because you're always off filming or doing the promotions of the film or interviews. So we knew we weren't going to be here for Christmas. So in October, she threw a Christmas party. And let me tell you, it's not easy to find a Christmas tree, get mistletoe, get all the presents, but everybody had a ball. And that was Misty. I think it was on her 70th birthday. When she had people over, she painted herself all in black, put a black wreath on the door, and surprised everybody. No, she was, I remember George Washington on his anniversary. We would dress up in New York as George and Martha Washington. She made work and life fun. But when you're on a film set, work is work. And when you play. You play. She always said, when you work hard, and when you play hard.
I love that. I have to learn this. And then another thing that I want to learn from Bette that you mentioned was making decisions. You said she would teach you to just make a decision and go for it.
Absolutely. Never sit or be wishy-washy, because as I learned, being a Libra represents the balance, and I had a time, it's like, okay, it could be this way, it could be that way, it could be this way, it could be that way. I try to see all sides of everything. And Miss Davis says, make a decision. Whether it's right or wrong, at least you've made a decision. If it's the wrong decision, you can cure it. You can go back, try to fix it. If it's the right decision, okay, you move on. But if you're not making any decision, then nothing is getting done. And that was her philosophy behind it.
I'm learning this from Misty because I made a decision to go back into dance classes a month ago. And then I had to buy sneakers, and then I had to work, and then I had sore throat. I'm going to learn to make a decision and go. Just make a decision and do it.
Yeah, for some people it comes very easily, and others it's a challenge.
And then you told me about the support for other women. And we talked about Me Too and how she was Me Too so many years before Me Too.
Always. One of the first things she always taught me is if women would stick together like men did back in her day, you had the boys' club. You had private clubs where they were called the gentlemen's club and only men could go into. And that's where a lot of times men, they made their deals. They were supportive of one another. And women, on the other hand, or in the office, they would fight their way up. They would fight against each other, almost like cats trying to climb their way up. And Miss Davis had no time for that. She didn't believe in it. She believed if women would just support, like I never had to ask for a raise. Miss Davis said, okay, you've learned that job. She would call the attorney, I want Kathryn to have a raise. She was very nurturing in after a year or two, you've learned that job? Okay, you're going to learn this job. And with a new job, you get a new pay raise. And it kept moving along. So yes, you start off as the assistant, then you get to be executive assistant, then you get to be associate producer. Now you're working with her on books. She's making sure that the publisher is paying me. I would have never asked that. At times I was making two salaries, one from the publisher and one from Miss D. That is what she meant by you do a good job, she compliments you always. And yes, if you did a bad job, you're going to hear about it right away. And rest assured, you won't make that mistake again. But that was fair, and how many bosses do you know who will just say, oh, I think you deserve a raise here? No, she was very, very ahead of her times, always.
I have another topic that I wanted to talk to you about.
Uh-huh.
You already mentioned The Lonely Life. I love that book so much.
It's a great book.
What really struck me with this book is just the joy of honest hard work.
Yes.
But another thing that I've learned from that book, and that my mom, I think, was trying to teach me always, is that ultimately we are alone. And I think that was partially the reason the book is called A Lonely Life. Because she did experience, like my mom did, that husbands come and go, children can come and go. You know, I moved to another country. She lost her children, two of her children in different ways. And that ultimately we are alone, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think the big lesson there for me was to learn to become my own best friend and to become my own source of happiness.
I think she always believed you come into this life alone and you go alone. So she embraced that. But she always had somebody around. I mean, she was always close with Mike and Shu, and certainly with Bette. They were super close until she had the stroke.
Mike and Shu, you have to explain for the listeners.
Sorry, Mike is Miss Davis's son, and Shu Merrill, that is his wife. And they had two, they would be Misty's grandchildren. And then there's Margot. Misty and Gary adopted Margot so that Bette would have a playmate. That's where she had the three children. But let me tell you, all along, even my time with Misty was very close to Bette. In those beginning years when I was working.
Bette is her daughter.
Bette, Barbara Hyman, that is her daughter. And they were very close. Bette would always write. We would go to the farm. She loved Bette more than anything, I would say, on this world. She really did. They just had a strong, strong connection. And I think it's also because she gave birth to Bette. The other two she adopted, but we would go see Mike and his family, and of course she adored her son. It wasn't that until Misty was in the hospital and she had the stroke, and we didn't know if she was going to make it or not, that I was told that's when Bette went and wrote the book. And when that book came out, then that was the betrayal of all.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate because without that, and I used to always say, well, if people had asked why, well, it's not hard to figure out. If you were going to write it, you had all these years to write it. But to wait and write it when your mother is fighting for her life, she's at the lowest point, and Misty beat all odds. Everybody said she wasn't going to make it. And I remember what Harold said, and I put it in the book. Don't underestimate Bette Davis. And that is one thing Miss Davis was predictable about, is being unpredictable, which I state many things in the book. You know, how she was so, that is one thing, she was predictable.
Kathryn, I love this for our ending. Should we end it on don't underestimate Miss Davis?
Absolutely.
Or do you have another lesson or anything else you would like to share?
No. Well, I don't know, did I tell you? And if you come to LA next, we just launched on her passing last year in October, the Bette Davis Malbec wine, the Turner Classic Movie, Bette Davis Malbec wine. And it is fabulous. It's from Paso Robles. We chose a Malbec because Miss Davis is French Huguenot, and that's where the Malbec grapes originated from.
My mom used to love Malbec.
Yes, it's an excellent wine. One can buy it through, I think it's a company called Whiteford, or through the Turner Classic Movies.
I'm going to have a glass of Bette Davis Malbec for her birthday.
Yes, it was sold out the first 3 weeks, and now they've reissued it again. So everyone should get one if they can toast her on her birthday.
Yes, we'll toast with her Malbec on 5th of April. I'm very excited.
Sounds wonderful. Well, I can't thank you enough and your viewers for listening. And I wish you the greatest success.
Thank you so much, Kathryn, and thank you so much for sharing all of this amazing wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you for having us.
And in July, a lemonade to cool you in some leafy glade. I wish you health and more than wealth. I wish you love.
If you have a mama you'd like to share, you could get in touch with me at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider. That's ANATAJDER. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.